Yeah, let's do it.
Sanders patiently running. Sanders good cut. And another block. Sanders still going inside the 40.
NFC East champs, divisional champs, NFC champs, and world champs.
Hello, everybody, and we are 2 days from the most anticipated game so far of the 2022 season. The Philadelphia Eagles traveling to D.C. to face former franchise quarterback Carson Wentz and the Washington, they should have kept the name as football team, Commanders. Thank you for joining us here on the Kelly Green Hour. I'm your host, LJ Harrell. And always, I am joined by my co-host, Connor Donald. And we have a guest today, Mr. Painted Lines himself, Dimes. What's up, Chris? How you doing?
What is going on? Happy Friday, gentlemen. Always a pleasure to jump in last second and talk some shop. But, man, what a game we have coming up on Sunday. So much to talk about. This is like arguably one of my most anticipated games of the year. Not the best game of the year, but the storylines underneath the game is one of my favorites. So
the NFL messed up. They should have had this game in Philly first.
Yes.
Not in DC. Because if this game was in Philly, it would have been a primetime game. Because the one in Philly later on is a Monday night, if I'm not mistaken. But they should have had the first Eagles-Commanders game in Philly, especially early in the season, because we don't know if Carson's going to be playing later. As much as I love Carson, we just don't know. But the NFL, that's messed up there. Connor, I know you guys have some weather issues up there in old Canada. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, Hurricane Fiona is coming fierce at us. I imagine it has made landfall on the far east in Nova Scotia, and we'll probably get like the tails of it and a lot of wind and a lot of rain, but hopefully that's it and that's all. But I agree. Honestly, this matchup is way better than the Giants and the Cowboys. The NFL messed up with this. They needed to make this. They should have rectified this by making an early season schedule change and making this the headline game because it's going to be pretty much a Philly home crowd. Let's be honest. Let's be serious. Let's not kid anybody here.
There are two different Philly fan groups going down in DC. Over 1,000 people, and it is going to. Eagles fans trek there anyway because it's so close, just like they trek to Jersey when they play the Giants. But even Commander fans don't like the Commanders, especially that crap hole stadium that they have here. But before we continue, as always, follow the Kelly Green Hour on Twitter at Kelly Green Hour. You can follow Connor on Twitter at Connor10. Follow Dives on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot. And follow me on Twitter at LJHerrell54. Follow the Painted Lines on Twitter and on YouTube at the Painted Lines. And follow Edge of Philly Sports, on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Edge of Philly Sports or EOP Sports. And as always, on the chat, let us hear your thoughts on the upcoming game, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Washington Commanders. Who's going to step up? Who needs to step up? How will Carson Wentz do? How will Jalen Hurts do? And just let us know your thoughts. We will definitely get to all of the comments. All right, guys. The big storyline.
I want to cut in L because I posted this earlier on Twitter, and I want to get your guys' thoughts. I don't know if you guys have read Tim McManus's report, but this will probably preface leading into the storyline. It was a massive report about the 2020 season and the relationship between Jalen Hurts, Carson Wentz, and pretty much he made a lot of key points that Jalen Hurts and Carson Wentz kind of both didn't want to work together. But Jalen Hurts was professional about it. Carson Wentz was a little less professional about it. And I know, obviously Tim McManus was probably waiting to drop this story until he knew the schedule was dropping and what actual day this game was going to be on. But he did drop the report. There's a lot of, at this point, I don't think they're bombshell statements about Carson Wentz, because at this point upon his departure, we kind of knew of these statements. Or these at least thoughts that he had about the team. So I'll read the tweet a little bit. So there's a couple things that I took from it, and I want to get your guys' opinion on it. First of all, first point, Wentz was reluctant to play within the Eagles' offensive system. He was irritated when the freedom to operate was stripped in 2020 due to injury and inefficiency, which obviously you should lose those rights when that happens. Wentz and Peterson's relationship became strained into the 2020 season. Wentz was viewed largely as a good guy and a good teammate within the locker room, but he was known to have a very tight circle, which included Zach Ertz and Nate Sudfeld. Wentz targeted his friend Zach Ertz significantly more than other options, which rubbed players the wrong way. Fantasy managers probably love that about Zach Ertz now, but no division was actually created in the locker room when the QB change happened in the Packers game. But Wentz was visibly upset prior to the Seahawks game when Hurts started receiving first-team reps, and then Hurts remained professional throughout the entire process, but the QB room did not interact very much on the field or at all, and the QB room mainly being Wentz and Hurts, because Wentz was very close friends with Sudfeld. So I want to kind of get your guys' thoughts on this, because this was kind of like the bombshell report of the week that people are talking about and people are reading. We'll start with you, LJ, because I know we've talked a lot about Hurts. You've been a Hurts critic. We've talked about Wentz a lot. I really liked Wentz. I think we may have moved on a little prematurely, but now you kind of see the same thing happen in Indianapolis and what's going to happen in Washington, what reports might come out of that. So, LJ, I mean, those were the 7 key points I took from it.
First off, I bet you Indianapolis wishes they had Wentz now because Matt Ryan is shot. That's a different story for a different day. We do have the Colts later on this year. Could be Nick Foles facing the Eagles and not Matt Ryan. But first off, if my starting quarterback is not mad that somebody else is coming on the field, then I'd be mad at him. Like, I want Carson to want to be on the field. So when Carson was in Philly in 2020, if he would have been like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to share the field with the backup," I would have issues with that. Like, I want my quarterback, I want my starting quarterback, I want my franchise quarterback to want to be on the field at all times. Like, I know when Vic came back in, was it whenever 09 or 10, whatever, and he had to split the field, and he would come on the field with Donovan. Donovan didn't like that either. But Donovan and I wouldn't expect Donovan to like it. And look, I'm not comparing Wentz to Donovan because Donovan's the best quarterback in Eagles history. But like if you have 2 quarterbacks per se, you don't have one type of deal. So if Wentz would have been happy with that, I wouldn't have been happy with Wentz. Look, we knew there were fractures in the locker room with Wentz and I actually do agree with Dave there. That the Foles statue really is what killed Carson Wentz's confidence. Winning the Super Bowl without Wentz, that killed his confidence. And him
no one will ever report it because it's such a boring thing to say that a statue really broke the camel's back. But we all know, Carson. We know. Yeah, they know.
And there were also reports back then that Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson didn't talk the last half of the last season, which was 2020. Yep. They didn't talk at all. And you can't have your head coach and your starting quarterback like not talking. They need to be in communication. So there was obviously something going on there. Also, with Wentz being upset that he didn't have the quote-unquote freedom to run, Doug Peterson's offense got very stale towards the end. And there was all this talk, and I was one of them, and I think Connor, me and you talked about it a lot back then, that he needed to give up play calling. And I'm not saying you give Carson the freedom to call plays, but whether it was who was the offense with Mike Groh, I think he was the receiver coach, but whoever it was, let them call, because the offense was very predictable. We knew what Doug Peterson was going to call. I'm sitting there watching the game, and I knew it was going to be a run up the middle on first down, play action on second down. Like, it was very, very predictable. So I don't blame Carson for being mad. Look, Carson wasn't, towards the end of his tenure here in Philly, he wasn't the best quarterback. He had a bunch of issues. Maybe it was the right time to move on at that time. But again, if my starting quarterback is happy that he's coming off the field for 10 to 15 to 20 plays a game, I don't want him to be my starting quarterback. So him being mad at that, or him not wanting to come off the field, I have no issue with that. Him wanting a little bit of freedom on the field to call audibles if needed, to get out of a play, to call a running play, call a passing play, whatever it may be. I believe all quarterbacks should have that freedom, especially if you want them to be able to control the game. So again, Carson being mad at that, I'm not mad at. Look, I'm a Carson fan. I think as an NFL quarterback, Carson is probably a better quarterback than Jalen. The intangibles, the leadership, all that, Jalen has that over Carson. That's no question about that. We see it time and time again. But I think Carson has a better arm. Carson might be a tad bit more accurate than Hurts, but Hurts is definitely working on it. You can see it for the first 2 games. So again, my whole thing is, if Carson wasn't mad at any of that stuff, then I have an issue with Carson. I don't have that issue. I don't have that issue with I don't have an issue with Carson being mad, because I want him to be on the field if he wants to be on the field, and he is supposed to be the franchise quarterback.
It just was unfortunate at the time that he was also playing like insanely poorly, and the team was playing insanely poorly, and it kind of forced Doug's hand and or Howie's hand, who knows, whoever made that personnel decision. Howie did say that they weren't going to take him out and that he didn't have to worry about the backup quarterback. And then boom, here we are. Jalen Hurts is currently our quarterback and stole the job.
Let me add one more thing. There was also, it's not just in the quarterback room or with Carson and Doug. There was definitely a fraction between the front office and Doug. Because there's no
100%.
way that Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman were seeing the same thing. Or even we can throw Jeffrey Lurie in there, because all the talk. Remember, after the 2019 season, Doug said, "Oh yeah, my coordinators are coming back." 2 weeks later, what happened? His offensive coordinator got fired. So it wasn't just with Carson and Doug and Carson and Hurts. It was a total avalanche of bad things that happened in 2019 and 2020.
Absolutely. And I do want to say, I think it speaks volumes to the locker room that despite, that he had his tight inner circle, that the culture tried to stay together. And I think that speaks to why they were so open to bringing Jalen Hurts in. And I think there's so many players that keep that culture together, like Jason Kelsey, like Fletcher Cox, despite what he went through. Like, there's some guys who've been there Brandon Graham, there's some guys who've been there a really long time who keep that culture together. And the fact that didn't fracture the locker room, that the fractures came from higher people, speaks to the maturity of that locker room and their willingness to accept a new culture. Because look how quickly they accepted the culture of Nick Sirianni. I thought that was huge when in that report it said the locker room did not see him as a bad guy, but it was Jeffrey Lurie, it was Doug Peterson, it was Howie Roseman. Those were the people who made it turn into what it was. The people who we should be able to trust to build a culture and build a team were the ones who created the fractured culture that existed. Deeves, I want to get to you for a minute before we get into this game and get your thoughts on that report. What you thought about Carson Wentz's time here maybe, and what you think about Jalen Hurts and how he's been handling things.
Yeah, I think El just absolutely crushed everything there. And I agree with pretty much everything he said. When I think back to the Carson Wentz days, I don't have any ill or remorse or hatred towards Carson whatsoever. It was just the issues for the Eagles started at the top. If you go back just a few years ago, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows like it is right now in Philly when it comes to the Eagles, man. The issues with the Eagles was Howie Roseman, was Doug Peterson, and that offense that El broke down. It was just the lack of cohesion on offense, the zero communication. Carson's just I agree with the comment earlier that Carson, when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, Carson had issues with that. 100% had issues with that, especially how beloved Nick Foles was in Philadelphia. He was jealous, no question. And he wanted to be that guy. And when you go back to 2017 with that injury, that was one of the darkest days of my life. The darkest days of my life when he got hurt in that Rams game. And you look, and it's not all his fault. And you fast forward to that hit from Jadeveon Clowney that took him out. But you cannot deny the mechanical issues he had after that injury. You cannot deny his performance on the field got worse. He had mechanical issues. He was throwing more on his back foot. He was playing way too much hero ball, like we've seen now. He continued to take way too many risks. He refused to kind of take, instruction or suggestions from staff. That's just kind of the narrative of Carson Wentz. And that entire report you just broke down, Connor, I believe all of it. It makes complete sense. So I'm excited to watch Carson Wentz. He's not like Dak Prescott out there where I want to strangle him. For me, I'm more excited just for the theatrics of the matchup, if that makes sense. I just not like Tony Romo out there. It is what it is. But for me, when I think back to Carson Wentz, I think of just a hot mess at the time of the state of the Philadelphia Eagles at that time.
Yeah, I definitely think Tim McManus was waiting. He had that info for ages and was just waiting to drop it. And this week was the perfect week because you knew everybody was going to be talking not about Commanders versus Eagles. It's Wentz versus Hurts. That is the biggest focus. And there's going to be so much. I loathe you guys in Philadelphia with your sports radio because if Hurts loses to Carson Wentz, that is going to be the most ridiculous week on sports radio ever.
Like, obviously, I want the Eagles to win, but I would love that this next week if that were to happen on sports radio. I would love it. Now, look, I want to ask you guys one quick question.
Man, we want the wins out.
I know we want the
Dak
wins, but
Prescott is out.
I think
we
for
want to
content,
be the best.
I think for content, it'd be awesome.
The
But
overreaction, yes.
yeah. So I want to ask you guys this real quick before we get into the game because the team or the person I'm going to bring up, I hate the team with a passion. So who is more hated in Philly? Carson Wentz or Ben Simmons?
Not even close.
Simmons.
It's not even close. Ben Simmons. No. Listen,
and that speaks volumes because the Eagles have the largest fan base by a mile in Philadelphia. And the fact that we can confidently say, go to Twitter, you can easily tell those people who are still defending Carson Wentz to this very, as we speak, there's probably a tweet going out about Carson Wentz and defending him. Thank you, Eliezer. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. And Ben.
And I sat that one out because I hate the Sixers so much. So like, I'm not
the bias.
I mean, listen.
Plus,
Philly,
and I'm still a Carson fan. Like I still like Carson.
Carson left with some sense of professionalism. Ben, the tail went between his legs and he just left. He was gone for a long time. Like Dave said.
Did you listen?
And I want to say,
not to change the subject. Did you listen? I want
to say one thing, LJ, before you finish that statement. Without Carson Wentz, 2017, a full year of Nick Foles, we do not win a Super Bowl.
Oh, we don't.
Sorry, we don't win a Super Bowl. So we have to give credit where credit is due. Ben Simmons still can't shoot a basketball. Let's face it. He didn't even want to play for the Nets in the playoffs. Let's face it. So,
and if you think about it, Carson came back early in 2018, like that Colts game. He came back. I was clamoring for him to come back, but he probably shouldn't have. He came back early because you don't want Foles. If Foles gets hot, how are you going to bring Carson back? If Foles is winning games after having just won the Super Bowl, how do you sit a Super Bowl MVP for Wentz? While Wentz is supposed to be the franchise coach. It was a total snowball effect, and it was hard for it was hard just for all that to end in a positive fashion, unfortunately.
And for better or worse, like Carson's the one that will be on the field and getting hit by Jadeveon Clowney, for better or worse, trying to get that extra yard. It's Ben Simmons in Game 7 who is passing up wide open dunks underneath the basket. Doesn't even want to be.
I made a mistake of bringing up Ben Simmons. This is an Eagles podcast. Nobody cares about the Sixers here. So let's move on to the Eagles and Commanders now. All right. So let's start with the Eagles offense. They are first in the NFL in yards per game, over 470 yards per game. I think it's easy to say this past Monday night's game against the Vikings was Jalen Hurts' best game as a professional. Easily the best game he's had as a professional. Look, while he only has one passing touchdown this year, he's got 4 rushing touchdowns, I think. Three rushing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns, whatever it is. That second rushing, the 26-yarder that he had on Monday night, I don't know how he got in. Like, that's that 600-pound squats that guy does. So he's really turning his game around, looking to become a more complete quarterback and using all of his weapons. We saw week 1 where it was the A.J. Brown show, but this week got Devontae, Quez, AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert, the running backs, everybody got involved. What could this Washington defense, what kind of challenge can this Washington defense pose to the Eagles offense when week 1 it was a running game, week 2 it was Jalen throwing the football? Dives, we'll start with you. Mute. I think you're on mute.
My bad. I'm back. That's a great question because it's, you first want to go to the Washington pass rush, right? Like when I think of Washington, I think of their pass rush. It hasn't been good at all for Washington. The depth isn't there. They haven't been performing. The Lions offensive line completely decimated the Washington defensive line in week 2. And you look at kind of some of their injuries on the interior, they're hurting as of right now. So you look at kind of the strength or some of the positives of the Eagles versus Vikings. I thought the defensive line for the Eagles played much better. I thought TJ Edwards blitzing up the middle was, even the blitz overall from Gannon has been good 2 games straight, but I thought especially in the Vikings game. Then you go to the cornerbacks that when you like talk about Jackson and Fuller, like I don't know how they match up against AJ Brown and Devontae Smith in the slot. There's a lot of advantages for the Eagles when it comes to offense versus defense. And then you get to Jack Del Rio. So I think Jalen Hurts is going to eat this guy for breakfast. What I have been so impressed with Jalen Hurts starts at the top, and that's what's his name, Steichen and Sirianni, just putting Hurts in positions to succeed. That RPO play where they have a lead blocker, whether it's a tight end or a running back or a wide receiver, and they basically allow Jalen Hurts to kind of pick his poison and expose the defense, wait for the defense to make mistakes every time. Like, we haven't seen a defense have an answer for that play yet. There's like little plays like that, and then you get the third down. So the Eagles have been an elite team on third down this year so far, and that's arguably probably the biggest leap forward in Hurts' development on third down. How does Jack Del Rio, respond to that? I don't think there's an answer. And then you go to linebackers for Washington. They're not playing well either. Like from a rushing attack, from a passing attack, this is a huge advantage in favor of the Philadelphia Eagles.
It is. And before I get to you, Connor, the one thing I like about Hurts is now I think this is him being like him. I don't think this is him faking it, but he always looks at what he can improve upon. And as good as the Eagles offense has been so far this year, he always talks about they're leaving meat on the bone. They're leaving a bunch of points out on the field, and he doesn't get too high on himself. Like he has shot up the MVP boards, and he's proving, or at least he's showing that he has the potential to be a franchise quarterback, but he doesn't let that get to his head. Connor, what are your thoughts on the Eagles offense and what they can do against this Washington defense?
Yeah, I completely agree with the points that Chris made. He kind of spoke to the Russian defense. It's been terrible. It's been putrid. 170 yards allowed per game ranks 28th in the league. On the passing side of the ball, they rank 21st. They're in the bottom 12 in both categories. They can't stop the pass. They can't stop the run. They have nowheres where they have a strength anymore, where we thought their strength was in the pass rush and attack. You never realized until now how much Chase Young meant to them. I knew that he meant a lot to them, but they still had guys like, look at some of the names that they still have out there. You still have Montez Sweat, you still have Josh Allen, you still have Daron Payne. You thought like maybe there was a chance that they could keep things alive for a little bit longer or keep things afloat without Chase Young until he gets back in week 4, which may be longer because like you said last week, El, it looks like he could be out a little bit longer. And ultimately at the end of the day, they haven't been able to stay afloat. They can't. They're not generating the pressure. They're not stopping the run. They're defensive backs, like you said. I mean, you're looking at Kendall Fuller, you're looking at the safeties haven't been that good. Will Jackson, Benjamin St-Juste, which I love Benjamin St-Juste through the draft process. I really was a big fan of him, but making him a starter, that's not going to work. Like it's just a mess right there in Washington. And while we have spoken about it all, that we think this is an underrated team, they definitely need to improve extensively on defense because well, I mean, we're going to talk about the offenses soon enough. And yeah, their offensive line is banged up, but they go shot for shot with whatever team they're playing against. So the Philadelphia Eagles defense is going to have to be playing on top of their game because they're not afraid to take shots. They're not afraid to push that ball down the field like potentially like Jared Goff, like Kirk Cousins. We didn't really see them really push the tempo or push the play. They made some attempts. Irv Smith had a putrid drop. Justin Jefferson was absolutely locked down by Darius Slay. But we never really saw much of an attempt by either of these first two offenses to push the ball down the field.
Wentz will do that.
Carson Wentz will 100% do that. So I agree with Chris in that they just haven't shown any strength on defense, and their offense has been forced to make up for it.
Yeah, and if you think, going back to what Washington did against Detroit last week, we gave up 35 points to Detroit, and everybody was talking about how like maybe we're overrating the Eagles. Maybe Detroit's just good on offense. Like they have a lot of weapons on offense, and that defensive line can get after the quarterback. Like, and now when you look at it, when Hurts was getting out of the pocket and avoiding sacks week 1, how many sacks did Detroit have? 1, maybe, I think, against the Eagles. They sacked Carson Wentz 7 times last week. And that's because Carson wasn't able to move. So, like, it's so tough that a lot of people want to judge a team or judge a season on 1 week. You can't do that. Look at Detroit. Against us, while they put up the points, they still weren't able to sack Jalen and stop the Eagles' offense. But against Washington, they got after Carson. They forced turnovers, and they were able to take advantage of that stuff. So you can't, again, I say it, and a lot of people are going to be like, well, duh, you can't. Well, you cannot put a season into 1 week or even 2 weeks. Let's jump over to now the defensive side of the ball for the Eagles, and we're going to start with the Washington offense. And obviously, we've talked about them enough. It's going to start with Carson Wentz. And as you just said, Connor, let's read it. Our offense is just better than their defense. As long as we execute, we should win this game. Don't overlook this or look lackadaisical. Just execute. If Carson wasn't on the other sideline, I would have fear of them overlooking Washington. But with Carson on the other sideline,
it focuses all the attention on that offense. They want to stop Carson Wentz, and the reports are out there that this locker room these coaches have been focused on Carson Wentz, stopping Carson Wentz, figuring out how to stop Carson Wentz. And I mean, as hard as that sounds, it's kind of simplistic at the same time. You just can't make more out of it than it has to be. And I trust our DBs more than I think any of the DBs that Washington has faced so far this season. So that's a game changer.
Yeah, before we get into what our defense, but as I mentioned, it starts with Carson. You mentioned, Connor, also that the Washington offensive line is banged up. But looking at the skill position for Washington, this is the best set of receivers, best, I think, offensive skills that Carson Wentz has played with. Yeah. You think about it. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Doxson, Curtis Samuel, Antonio Gibson, Logan Thomas. Like, these are a lot of weapons on the Washington defense, or excuse me, on the Washington offense. And while they don't have a Justin Jefferson where you say, Slay, cover that guy and follow him all over the field, maybe that could be Terry McLaurin. He has the arm strength, and he has the playmaking ability where Carson Wentz will be able to just dish the ball to these guys. So Chris, what do you think about this offense and how Ron Rivera and Carson Wentz are going to want to attack the Eagles defense?
Well, it all comes down to the Commanders' offensive line. That's pretty much what it is. I mean, you look at that Lions game, Aiden Hutchinson was barely getting touched on that line of scrimmage and just going straight at Carson Wentz. So for me, I look at Josh Sweat because if Hassan Reddick, I look at our edge rushers who struggled in week 1, played much better in week 2, especially Josh Sweat versus Carson Wentz. Because when you can get in the grill of Carson Wentz, he's a completely different quarterback, just like Kirk Cousins. When you get that guy, throwing on his back foot and just heaving that ball up, that's when you have a good situation brewing, because Kirk Cousins was 5 of 13 passing for 37 yards and 2 interceptions when under pressure against the Eagles in week 2. Carson Wentz was 5 of 14 when under pressure. He had 3.8 yards per attempt in week 2 against the Lions. So these are This same story. I want to see Jonathan Gannon dial up the blitz yet again in week 3. When they have done it, the Eagles have looked very good. And some of the same stuff, like disguising their blitzes and some stunts. Aiden Hutchinson was feasting off of those in week 2. I look at Josh Sweat, having a huge game here on Sunday because that Washington offensive line just isn't good enough, especially when we've seen the blitz come up the middle for the Eagles last week in week 2. That was awesome. I want to see more of that.
We talked about going into week 1 how the Lions offensive line was going to play a couple backups, and the Eagles couldn't get to him. Couldn't get to Jared Goff. That's my only worry. But Fletcher Cox played really well last week.
Yeah.
Javon Hargrave played really well last week. Josh Sweat had a decent game. Still haven't seen much from Hassan Reddick. That's why I brought him up. We want to see Hassan Reddick get after the quarterback, prove that he's not overpaid. The Eagles giving him all that money to come over here and get after the quarterback. So that's definitely going to be key. That front 4, and Gannon is still the worry for me because Gannon, I don't want him to step back from the approach he had last week because that approach, like you mentioned, Chris, he had a great approach going into that game. Nobody anticipated them playing as much man as they played, letting Slay travel with Jefferson, having TJ Edwards blitz a couple of times and calling multiple blitzes. Nobody foresaw that happening. I didn't think it was going to happen. That's why I picked Minnesota to win. And he changed up his entire game plan. I don't want him to revert back to playing the too high safety look and whatnot. I need to see him to continue to be aggressive with this defense. Connor, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. 100%. I want to throw in some stats there. So Washington has given up 19 total pressures on the season. 13 of them came last week. That was it. 13 pressures last week. 2 of them sacks. It was bad for them, and that was Aiden Hutchinson. And I mean, I would argue we have a better defensive line, a more complete defensive line than the Detroit Lions. You got Javon Hargrave, you got Fletcher Cox, and we had someone in the comments 2 weeks ago talking about how they look gassed in week 1. That's why Marlon Tuipolito got the opportunities that he got. That's likely true. And they played 65% snaps last week, and they looked really good. And maybe that's the direction that they have to continue to go. Really flex your muscles. You got Milton Williams, you got Jordan Davis, you got 4 different defensive tackles who can work the interior. And you got, I think they're running on their backup, or they moved their right guard to center, and they're running on their backup right guard now. So there's an opportunity to really take advantage of the interior while you guys talk about Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham and Hassan Reddick, which is 100% true. They have to execute as well. I think that they can really take advantage on the interior because you got essentially 2 backups. While moving Landon Dickerson to center, we can sit there and we can be like, oh, that would be great. We're not worried about that. Not every team has that ability to be comfortable with making that move. While they have that comfort of moving a right guard to center, they are moving a backup into a specific position and into positions that they don't normally play. So I think it's going to be a big game all along that defensive line, like you guys said. But I also think it helps if the defensive backs can stay on their guys too. Like you said, they don't have a Justin Jefferson. And while Terry McLaurin hasn't had an incredible season or a good season at all, Jahan Dotson has stepped up. Curtis Samuel with his 2-yard average depth of target has been huge after the catch. And we have sucked with missed tackles, which scares the hell out of me that Antonio Gibson or Curtis Samuel and what they can do to make people miss tackles. We need to just start getting those tackles. I think it's back-to-back weeks now that we had double-digit missed tackles. I think we had 12 and we had 16. That's huge. That's a lot of missed tackles in 2 weeks of football and way too many missed tackles in football. And I know that we talk about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He's adjusting to the defense. It doesn't matter if you're adjusting to the defense. A tackle is a tackle. In any defense that you're in, you just have to make the tackle, and he's missed multiple tackles in back-to-back games. So that scares the hell out of me that a guy like Curtis Samuel is showing out the way he is after the catch, and we've been so bad in the missed tackles department because the average depth of target is 2 yards for Curtis Samuel. It doesn't matter what Slay does or what Bradbury does. Those 2 aren't going to be on him. Jahan Dotson and McLaurin are going to be outside. Those are going to be the focuses of those guys. It's going to be Avonte Maddox, who's missed a decent amount of tackles. It's going to be Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's missed a fair amount of tackles. It's going to be those guys who have to make the plays on Curtis Samuel and Antonio Gibson, and that kind of worries me defensively for us.
Chris, let me ask you something, because you watch tape and you put out a bunch of videos, and if you don't follow him, please do, because he's really good at it.
No, thanks.
Are we going to see Jordan? And last week was tough because Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave had really good games. But Jordan Davis had 21 plays, was on the field for 21 snaps last week, I think it was. Are we going to see him more? Or is this just they're going to pretty much use him to stop the run, and Minnesota really couldn't run the ball last week?
I think it looks like people aren't going to like to hear this, but it looks like we're going to see what we've seen so far. You're probably going to see somewhere around the mid-20s when it comes to snaps. He clearly, if you watch him, man, the guy plays way too upright, especially in the second half against the Vikings. I put out a video. He's got basically one move. He bull rushes. And while I think he's absolutely terrific, and I'm really excited to see him grow, he needs to develop his skill set, his move set, very much so. And that was kind of like why we were kind of being real about this draft pick. When it went down, was why would you draft a guy that's only going to be playing in run situations and not a 3-down starter? That being said, I'm super excited about Jordan Davis. I think you're going to see more of what you get, at least until his conditioning gets up, at least until he gets coached a little bit more. He was sensational against the run, at least in week 1. In week 2, it was pretty interesting because if you watch the video, I could put it up here if you want me to. Yeah. All right, hold on. The Vikings went away from him a lot. A lot of the plays were on the outside, so he wasn't involved very much. Hold on, let me get this thing up.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I actually agree with Chris, because I watched this video. I watched its every snap of the All-22 film, and he just plays upright. He only has a bull rush, but he's ineffective with the bull rush. That's what's so frustrating, because he's not that effective with it. But there are a couple plays, as if you watch through the entire video, which I think is a couple minutes long. Chris, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a couple times where he uses other moves, and he becomes a little more effective when he tries to bat the arm down or use a spin move or something. And the fact that he's so athletic and he doesn't use those moves is frustrating to me, because I think that if he can expand that skill set, like you said, Chris, he could be so much better, so much more effective in those 20% of snaps and earn more snaps.
And let me just add this, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm piling on Jordan Davis here. But he has been getting a lot of double teams through 2 games, no question. So he's getting a lot of attention, and you'll see it throughout this video. But that was the case as well in week 1. So
and he faced a pretty effective center in Garrett Bradbury this past week. Garrett Bradbury is a pretty good center.
Frank Ragnow in week 1 is sensational. So.
Because if you watch in a lot of these clips, he lines up almost directly over center. So you're constantly the first person you face is that center, and he faced 2 top 10 centers in the NFL easy in the first 2 weeks.
So let me ask a quick question, because there was all the talk that the Eagles should have drafted Kyle Hamilton, and watching that Ravens game, Hamilton was out. Now I know safety's a different position than defensive tackle, but boy, Hamilton was out of position a lot against Miami, and that is Miami. They got a bunch of speed. I don't know if you had a chance to watch video on Hamilton, and it's still early, but do you still think and forgive me if I'm misinterpreting this. I think you kind of, I know there were other people, on the Painted Lines team that wanted them to go towards Hamilton. Did the Eagles make the right choice? I know it's early. It's tough to say now, but early, just watching both guys play. What were your thoughts be on that?
I mean, I can't take back what I said. It is what it is. I thought Kyle Hamilton was arguably my favorite draft pick in the entire draft last year. I was very upset the Eagles didn't select Kyle Hamilton. It is what it is. Howie just does not value the safety position whatsoever. That's just facts. So I was upset about it. I wasn't upset about the Jordan Davis selection because I still had a top 15 grade on him. I still think he's going to be great down the road. I still would lean towards Kyle Hamilton right now. Now, so like, it's too early. It's too early.
It
It's
is.
too
It
early.
is too early. I know.
That's just the problem. Is like on both guys, we're not going to know until at least a year or two.
And look at the way the DBs talk. It is one of the hardest positions to play in football right now, because no matter what you do, you're always the one getting flagged. You're always the pass interference. It's a tough position to play safety or cornerback. Those are probably two of the toughest positions to play in football right now, because they are the focus of defenses. How can we exploit them? How can we get our passing game to work against these DBs? And they're always the ones like, you can push and shove all you want. 95% of the time, who's getting a call for pass interference? It's going to be the DB. Like, it's just such a hard position to play. And while I do think, listen, there was like, he was considered a generational talent, Kyle Hamilton, and there wasn't very many like generational or really high end talents. It was really like, as the draft led up to it, a lot of scouts were saying there's a top 15. And then, well, you saw it the way people were drafting. It was a dog's breakfast. You could pretty much draft whoever you wanted to draft, but the scouts were comfortable with taking whoever, wherever after the top 15. But that doesn't necessarily mean, because this draft class was kind of noted as a weaker class, that it wasn't going to take time for some of these guys to develop. And I think that people expected Kyle Hamilton to just snap the finger, come into the NFL and be this top end player. But I don't think it's necessarily 100% true, but I agree with you, Chris. I think give it a year or two, we're going to look back and we're going to say, maybe we should have went safety here. But I do disagree with you in one regard, Chris, and that's that if he didn't value the position, he wouldn't have went and got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And it'll speak volumes. Will he extend Chauncey Gardner-Johnson? That will be the true teller. Do you value the safety position or not? You invested the draft capital. Are you going to pay this man?
So anybody that follows the draft as much as I do, if you followed the last, like the reason I say that is like, if you look at 3 years in a row, at least on this channel, I have been gushing over safety after safety, like year after year after year, and the Eagles never get one of them, and it just kills me, especially day two guys. And I'm not like rooting for like Kyle Hamilton in the top 15. I'm talking about just day two guys, and we never get one of them. And there's several of them that are absolutely beasts across the NFL now. So that's the only reason I say that. It's like it kind of hurts my soul.
Look at guys like Antoine Winfield and stuff, and Jeremy Chin, man. Like,
wow.
What we could,
if they would have taken Jeremy Chin, they probably wouldn't have.
It wouldn't be Jalen Hurts. Yeah, that was the question. Was Jeremy Chin or was Jalen Hurts, and how he pulled the plug and said, "I'm taking Jalen Hurts."
All right, so last week Slay pretty much handcuffed Justin Jefferson at 2 picks, 5 pass defense, and 1 NFC Defensive Player of the Week. Is this a week where he can just play one side, or will he follow McLaurin around, follow Dotson around, or is this just Slay, you play one side, Bradbury, you play the other side, and let's play defense?
I just want to say that PFF needs to clean their crap up, because they said there was one pass breakup by Darius Slay, and I can tell you
know how I
now,
feel about
there was
PFF.
way more. There was way more. Yeah, but I always was fine with like the pressures, the pass breakups. Okay, you see those, but he had way more than one pass breakup. I am sorry. But yeah, here we'll play the video. You will see. Like, I don't know what classifies as a pass breakup.
There's a pass breakup. That's the first target.
It was a pass interference, but they didn't call it. So
yeah, but then what was it? A couple
on
plays,
that play, TJ Edwards killed Dalvin Cook. He literally ran right through Dalvin Cook.
And on the next possession, there was a really skeptical call. Not the next play, but the next possession, when it was us on offense and them on defense. I think there was a pretty touchy call there. So you win some, you lose some. But in regards to your question about Darius Slay, I mean, after what happened last week, you're going to put him on whoever's starting to burn you. If Jonathan Gannon's smart, if Curtis Samuel is the one who's starting to hurt you, you put him on Curtis Samuel. If it's Jahan Dotson, you put him there. If he needs to be outside, if he needs to play the nickel back for a week, so be it. Follow the guy who you think is burning you the most. If Curtis Samuel's got 2 catches for 20 yards or 3 catches for 40 yards, you put him on the guy who's giving you the toughest time for figuring out how to scheme against him. That's my thoughts on. I don't care about outside, inside, nickelback. I don't care about where you put him. You put him where he's going to stop the guy who's giving your defense the hardest time.
Man, Slay could have had 6 interceptions on Monday night. It's crazy. This is the first. So this is the first of 3 in a row for the Eagles where they got a former player or coach they're going up against. Carson this week, Doug next week, Zach Ertz the week after. This is going to be a fun time to talk the Philadelphia Eagles, and if they continue to play, man, that was he was so good on Monday night, Darius Slay. I'm just watching this video.
And Justin Jefferson talked so much crap that he deserved it. He deserved. Did
you see that? I don't know if I think it was Kyle. Was it Kyle Brandt who said if the Vikings win, just stay tuned for Justin Jefferson's press. Come on now.
What about you, Chris? I mean, I want to get your perspective on what do you do with Darius Slay? What do you do with the defensive backs? I mean, it's clear we love James Bradbury, but Darius Slay is clearly the more effective, the guy who reads the plays the best, breaks up the passes, does his job extremely effectively. How do you use him against these 3 wide receivers who any one of them could go off and be very effective on any given night?
I would put him on Terry. I'll put him on Scary Terry and see how it goes. I mean, that was the best performance I've seen from Darius Slay as an Eagle, right? That was easy, right? Yeah, there's been times, and I'm not hating on Darius Slay, but there's been times where he's gone up against number 1 receivers, and he's kind of.
I also think scheme has to do with that.
No question. But for whatever reason, you could probably ask my man Shane. He knows the X's and O's way more than I do. But it looked personal for Darius Slay. It absolutely looked personal. That was the most engaged Darius Slay I've seen in a while. I think Terry McLaurin's a terrific wide receiver. Arguably underrated. I think he's very, very good. So for me, I think Avante had a great game. I think James Bradbury has been terrific as well through 2 games. I would put Slay on Terry and just say forget it. And
we have a really good trio of CBs. That's just Avante Maddox. While week 1 was a little touch and go, he was much more effective.
Maxwell days?
Oh God,
he was much more effective this week against he took on Irv Smith. He made some great pass breaks up. Yeah. Oh God. But and then James Bradbury and Darius Slay on the outside, they're super effective. They're super effective. Sure, you should be able to put any of these 3 guys on any of these 3 guys and be 100% confident that they can allow enough time for the front 4 to get home.
I feel like we're not talking about James Bradbury enough through 2 games. He's been really strong.
Which is a good thing. I think that's a good thing because if you don't hear the cornerback's name, unless Slay, you heard his name because he was all over. Jefferson had a bunch of picks, but if I'm not hearing James Bradbury's name, that means he's not doing anything bad. Now, obviously, he had the pick 6 against Detroit, but he's doing his job. He was brought in here to be the second corner behind Slay to stop the second receiver, and that's exactly what he's doing. So the fact that we're not talking about him, I think that's a positive more than.
And I definitely think I definitely think that James Bradbury is better than what Steven Nelson was last year as a second.
No question.
Easily has been. And he doesn't have to do that much. He just has to keep the second wide receiver or whoever his assignment is at bay. And Darius Slay will do the rest, or Avante Maddox will do the rest, or the safeties will help out with the rest. I mean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson easily could have cost us a touchdown. He got absolutely roasted by Irv Smith Jr. And we could have been talking about a very difficult, like we said on the last episode, El, there are 2 plays that probably were difference makers. Aaron Sipas's catch-up tackle that he made, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Irv Smith's drop. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson got blown up, but it would have been Irv Smith's drop that's the biggest play. Those 2, we may very well be talking about an extremely different game at this point.
And I think so too. And when it comes to Bradbury, I think we're starting to see the Carolina Bradbury, and obviously not the Giants Bradbury, because the Giants Bradbury was bad, but that was also a terrible organization to play for at the time. And I'm not saying they're better now, but they're at least better. They have better structure now, I guess, with the Giants compared to when he was there the last couple of years.
And shout out to Marcus Epps. I don't get this, just give a shout out. to Marcus Epps because I've been kind of not his biggest fan over the last couple of years, but he's
Neither
made
is
some-
LJ, so it's okay.
He's making plays. He's
Probably he is the best safety on the team right now, which I don't know if that says much.
I was gonna say, what's the competition? A guy who's learning the defense,
Exactly.
and then
That's why I said it doesn't say much.
a bunch of guys playing 5% of snaps at best. Like Kevon Wallace is a special teamer. Like they're buried. I have to admit, and we talked about it last week, El. I'm happy Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, despite what he's going through, despite the inconsistencies, that he is being played 80%, 90% of the time. Same as Marcus Epps, 100% last week, exactly. And Marcus Epps, similar situation. Because at the end of the day, I think it's really important that these guys, we see what we need to see out of these guys, because this could be a duo at the safety position for the future. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson could get his extension, just like we saw Josh Sweat, Dallas Goedert last season. These guys he could be in line for an extension, and how he's waiting for just the right time to lock that extension down. But I think Marcus Epps and CGJ can very much be the safeties of the future in this organization.
Yeah, I don't think they give up that draft capital for Gardner Johnson and not bring him back. I think they're going to, unless something catastrophic happens.
I know the biggest point of contention is he wants to be paid as a safety, not a CB, because safeties are played better.
Well, he did come here to be the safety. So,
and yeah, like now that you've played him essentially at safety for the large majority of his snaps, you have to respect that you're paying this man as a safety.
Yep. Yeah, all right. So go ahead, Chris.
I'm just saying I don't have a grasp on Chauncey Gardner-Johnson just yet. He's one of those guys that kind of have flown under the radar through 2 weeks. I definitely need to kind of see like what he's best at right now. And I thought coming in it's more of a slot defender, but I want to kind of take some time, probably in like several weeks from now, and kind of look at him as a safety, because I don't know just yet. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's going to take time. Like they're not going to give him the extension tomorrow. Same thing when they signed Alshon to the 1-year contract in 2017 and gave him the extension halfway through the year. We may see it in a couple months. So We'll see. All right. So it's prediction time. What I want from each of you, give me a quick run, how you think the game's going to go, and a player to watch out for, and your score. So we'll start with you, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to say what I said. I joined a Commanders podcast on Wednesday night, and I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say 33-27 Eagles. Get the W here. I think Washington covers. I think the Eagles are probably flying too high. I think they're flying just a little too high right now. That without being said, like it could be like first half and the Eagles are up big like the Lions were last week. And then you get Carson Wentz getting garbage stats like Jalen Hurts did in 2021. So for me, the player to watch for is 100% Devontae Smith. You look at Kendall Fuller and William Jackson. Those two guys, the Commander slot defenders have been absolutely chewed up through the first 2 games of the season. Jackson has allowed a 152.1 quarterback rating on 10 targets. Fuller has given up a 21.6 yards per reception. Those two guys, I don't see any reason why Devontae Smith doesn't have a huge game again. 3. I love the chemistry, the timing I saw. I love the game plan I saw. I think Devontae had the first reception of the game, just getting him involved early and often.
Everybody knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, I want to see more of that. I want to see more of that in week 3. I think that's a great recipe for success where you have such a huge mismatch there with Devontae against those guys and everyone else. And then that will set up the run, which is pretty much in contrast to 2021. So for me, Devontae, Eagles get the W, win by 6.
I'll give you Chris, we usually talk about a defensive player too. So we'll give you a defensive player. Do you got one?
Oh, absolutely. Give me TJ Edwards, baby. I think he's one of the underrated stars of last week. I thought he was awesome. Absolutely awesome. You look at that interior offensive line for the Commanders is beaten up a little bit. I love what I saw with Gannon's plan of getting him up at that line, blitzing. He was all over the field. We saw a couple during that Darius Slay highlight reel. There was some more where he was just leveling guys out there, just making a statement. TJ Edwards, I kind of ripped him a little bit in week 1. I thought he was arguably one of better players of week 2. So I'm going to roll with TJ Edwards versus Washington. The Washington Commanders can't get their ground game going and keep that Eagles offense off the field. It's going to be a long day in Washington.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I'll jump in, L, and then I'll pass it to you. Antonio Gibson is not Dalvin Cook, and we stopped Dalvin Cook. Like, their lead rusher was Kirk Cousins. 20 yards for Kirk Cousins, 17 for Dalvin Cook. Like, that's gross. That is putrid. So if they're able to continue to call the plays, like you guys said, like Jonathan Gannon, if he was a player on the field, but like essentially he is a guy we need to watch. Jonathan Gannon cannot come off of the plays the way that he called last week, because that was the timing of the blitzes, the way that he situationally placed that defense into the perfect positions to make the plays that they made definitely needs to be something that remains a focus this week. And don't sleep on the Washington Commanders just because they're not like the Minnesota Vikings or other opponents that we might see. For me, Miles Sanders is going to be the guy for me. I would have taken Devontae Smith because I absolutely agree with you, because, I mean, you look at Fuller and Jackson, they've both given up, Jackson's 137 yards, Fuller's 108, 21.6 yards per reception and 15.2 yards per reception. That's terrible. Obviously, Devontae Smith, is going to probably feast. But mine would be Miles Sanders against this Russian defense. This Russian defense has been terrible. They just can't get things going. And the big thing with Miles Sanders is that as soon as he gets going, like, he might have a 2-yard rush, but then he's going to come back with like a 15-yard rush.
He's also running different this year.
He definitely is.
He's way more patient, and when he hits a hole, he hits the hole. He doesn't dance.
Which I think is one of the reasons to why, fingers crossed, he's staying healthy as well. Because he's not just barging into a hole. And I see you rolling your eyes, LJ. Damn it. But the hope is that, he continues to run like that. He continues to be patient. He continues to find the right hole to hit, and he doesn't get hit, because he is a guy who we know, the soft tissue injuries and stuff can really get to him. So that's my guy, is Miles Sanders in this game. And defensively, I like your pick of TJ Edwards. I want to pick an interior defensive lineman, but it's so hard to pick because of the way that they split it. But Javon Hargrave's been way too quiet for me. I think this is a Javon Hargrave game. I think Javon Hargrave is going to feast. When you talk about the way that they line up, if Jordan Davis is on the field, they line up directly over. So it all depends on where he's lining up. But I think that no matter what, if you put Javon Hargrave on the right side against that defensive line, against that center, against that right guard, who you're pretty much playing backups at each position, I think Javon Hargrave can feast. And this could theoretically be a Jordan Davis game. If they give him enough time out there and he gets the opportunity to play right over top of center, this is easily the weakest center that he's going to play so far this year. And he could have an opportunity. But I think this is a Javon Hargrave game if I were to give one.
Score?
Oh, yes. 34-31 for the Eagles. I agree with Chris on this one. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. I don't think it's going to be as low as last game. I do think Gannon's going to sleep a little bit, and that's going to allow the opportunity for the Commanders to get some garbage time. Exactly. My biggest concern going into the second half was that Gannon and Sirianni or Steichen would take their foot off the gas pedal, and they didn't. But there's going to be a game where they do it. There's going to be a game where they do it. They always do it. This feels like that type of game where they might do that. But I think it comes down to like a game-winning field goal on the foot of our best special teamer, Jake Elliott.
Special teams, if there's been a weakness of this team, it has been special teams, that's for sure. I don't know who they're going to have returning punts, because I don't think you can keep putting Britton Covey back there.
If you bring Covey up, you have to sign or release him this week. It's the biggest decision. So
maybe they will release him. I don't know if anybody would pick him up anyway. So on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go Hassan Reddick as the guy to watch. He's done nothing so far. Maybe he has a tackle or pressure or whatever. But I think that this week he'll finally get on the stat sheet with a sack. Carson, the one thing thing about Carson is he likes to hold on to the football too long. I think Hassan Reddick will be able to take advantage of that on one of those double pumps that Carson likes to do as he's looking to throw the ball down the field. They'll get after him. On the offensive side of the ball, I was going to go Miles Sanders, so I'll have to change it up, and I'm going to go Dallas Goedert.
Oh.
I just think Dallas Goedert, he's going to have to score a touchdown this week. Again, Hurts only has one passing touchdown. That was to Quez Watkins on whatever the safety for Minnesota was doing, going with Jack Stahl instead of Quez Watkins. I'll never understand. But I'm going, I think Dallas Goedert will have a big game. I don't think any of the linebackers on Washington can cover him. No. And I definitely don't think the safeties can cover him.
And one of the things that stands out about Goddard for me is he's number one among tight ends for yards per reception. He's being used so differently and so uniquely. You talk about just the linebackers. Think about the safeties too. Yeah. There's nobody on that Washington team who's going to be able to cover the middle of the field. When you think of Devontae Smith and you think of Dallas Goedert, those two feel like perfect picks by the two of you.
Yep.
That's what makes me nervous. These are the same exact things I said against the Detroit Lions. Like the same. We're almost saying the same things. Like the mismatches are all over the place, offense versus defense. But you look, it was a 3-point game.
We had a week to think about it, and Gannon had a week to think about it. So Gannon's Sirianni's probably like, So I wonder what we should do here.
So the 6.5, being a 6.5 point road favorite scares me also. Like, it's a division game. The quarterback, that seems like a lot. I think Washington's definitely going to cover. I think it's going to be 27-21.
We're all pretty close.
I'm going to say Eagles win this one, but Carson's going to win the one in Philly if he's playing. I think Carson beats the Eagles once this year.
This division is like, if we go into any of these divisional games and we predict any less than like a complete shootout, we'd be crazy, because it just feels like these teams are just going to go back and forth constantly and drive the score up. We can sit here and brag about Gannon and how well he did last week, but that's why never bet on divisional games. It's just not worth it, because you definitely know that something is not going to go right. And this feels, like you said, El, like it's just, and same with you, Chris, you guys said it, they're just not going to cover because it's a divisional game. And the fact that you give almost a touchdown favorite to a divisional game, that is an easy bet of the underdog.
Even if you look at it, we know the Eagles are more talented, but it's on the road, and as crappy as that stadium is, and as many as Eagles fans are going to be there, and we know Washington fans don't even like their own team. I just find it hard for Washington, especially like Carson. This week, if there's a week that Carson wants to be perfect, it's this week that he's going to want to do everything perfect, and obviously it's not going to happen. We all know he has those brain glitches. So where he does something stupid, he'll throw 2 picks in like back-to-back possessions, but he's definitely going to go out there and look to try to get the ball down the field and put up points against this Eagles defense. A lot of guys that he played with, a lot of guys that he won a Super Bowl with. But it'll be fun. Again, I'm still a Carson fan, and while I want him to do well, I just don't want him to beat the Eagles.
I was going to say, the fact that you said Carson Wentz wants to be perfect, he's going to hold on to that ball too long, and we have a good chance of getting home, because he's going to think way too deeply and way too much about what's
but we always think
on.
that. We always think when the Eagles go up against an inferior defensive line that they're going to have like 5 sacks and they don't even sniff the quarterback. So
he's going to channel his inner like Ryan Fitzpatrick against the Eagles. And
Ryan Fitzpatrick kills the Eagles all the time.
Every time.
They should have just signed him as a backup so he couldn't do it. I mean, I know.
I just want to say, I forgot to share this stat, but pressured completion percentage for Carson Wentz is 22.7%. That's 31st among quarterbacks. If Gannon cannot pull up a stat on playerprofiler.com and realize what he has to do this week, I don't think I can help this man with what he needs to do this week.
Jalen Hurts is 8-2 in his last 10 games, and only Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady are better. Now, obviously, the opponents aren't good for the Eagles, but Jalen Hurts is winning games that he's supposed to win.
And real talk, like, can we just throw it out there? Like, that had to be one of the worst defensive game plans I have ever seen for the Minnesota Vikings in week 2.
We talked about it. Yeah, when we talked last week, we were like, it felt like we were watching Jonathan Gannon of last year. 0 adjustments,
None.
nothing.
We went and we watched every single Jalen Hurts snap a few nights ago, and I counted 4 blitzes. Jalen Hurts plays runs and pass, 4 blitzes, and one of them, I think Hurts was one of 3, and then one of them was that dropped interception from Kenny Gainwell. That's inexcusable. If that stuff happens in Philadelphia, man, I would be livid, absolutely livid, because you look at the Bucs game, you look at the Lions game, those teams were heavily pressuring Jalen Hurts. That's one of the huge areas we want to see Jalen Hurts take that next step. And when he gets the ball out fast, he looks really strong. But to come out there and blitz less than 10% of the time, like, that's inexcusable. And to be fair, like, I don't think the Washington Commanders have the ability to put pressure like that, like the Lions or like the Bucs. So I think Jalen Hurts is going to feast, man. I really do.
And I know you guys are from the Philly area, so you guys might have watched a Philly broadcast, but I watched a national media broadcast, and they actually pulled it up a couple times and drew the too high shell. Look at what he's doing again.
Aikman
They just
did that,
showed it.
Yeah, Aikman was
so
like,
you guys
why
saw
are they
the
not making
broadcast? I
adjustments?
saw that. Yeah.
So for football, there is no local broadcast during the regular season. Like baseball, we have Tom McCarthy and whatnot. But yeah, so for the NFL, it's always the national team.
Okay, so we saw the same thing. They literally got to the point where they, in the second half, drew it out and said, here's the shell again. Take a look at these 4 or 5 guys who were playing 8 yards and 20 yards off. It felt way too much like Jonathan Gannon last season. It was
unbelievable.
Brutal.
All right, so we all have the Eagles winning, which means bet the house on Washington.
It's so true, though.
It is really true.
Maybe not well, you can probably bet the money line too, but you definitely should bet that 6.5 over, or 6.5. That
definitely.
For sure.
All right, Chris, tell our viewers where they can catch you next.
All right. Tomorrow I'll be putting out a ton of college football, NFL draft videos. As if anybody subscribes to this channel, I'm in love with not all of, but a good chunk of the college of the quarterback prospects in this year's draft.
Who's your favorite?
My favorite right now?
Is it Will Levis?
Oh, he's not having a great year.
Don't do it, Chris.
He's not having a great year, but man, that ball pops. That ball pops, man. Out of his hand.
He feels so much like Malik Willis. The intangibles, the traits, but he needs work. He ain't a day one starter.
There's some other guys that are like scream Malik Willis. Like KJ Jefferson has been absolutely awesome. If you haven't heard from Anthony Richardson, has really struggled. So I don't know if Florida plays tomorrow, so I really want to watch Florida. But he needs a bounce back game, because I think his talent is incredible. It's just everything else. So my favorite, it's got to be CJ Stroud right now. The way that guy just gets out of the pocket, his accuracy on the move.
Florida plays Tennessee tomorrow.
All right, that's a good game. Yeah, I'll be watching that.
That's a 3:30 kickoff.
Nice. So that'll be fun. Yeah, Anthony Richardson's he's not Vince Young, but he's kind of got that feel a little bit, if you know what I mean. But when he's clicking, the dude is unstoppable at times. He has a lot of really fun vibes.
I still think he's raw.
The difference between this year's quarterback class and last year's quarterback class is last year was a lot of guys that were run pass second. This year's draft class is pass first, run second. They pass the ball to set up the run. It's a little bit different. And I think all those guys have much better arms than we've seen in last year's crop. So you can find me having fun watching college football all day long. That's what I do. And then of course we on Sunday for Eagles, we have pregame, halftime, and postgame live shows, and of course every single highlight reel you could ever think of. My podcast is Party on Broad. We are Monday nights at 9:00. So just awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for joining us. And you'll be able to catch Connor and I again on Tuesday around 6:15, 6:30, around this same time, having a reaction show to the Eagles Washington Commanders game. And then I think next week we got to do Thursday potentially because I'm away next weekend. But
Nice.
I think Connor's also away next weekend. For Doug Peterson's return back to Philly. Can't wait for that. So that'll be fun. That'll be fun to talk about. So follow the Kelly Green Hour on Twitter at Kelly Green Hour. You see all our names. Follow Connor on Twitter at Connor10, Chris on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot, and me on Twitter at LJ Harrell 54. Eagles, Washington Commanders, Carson Wentz against his old team. Should be fun to watch. Thank you for watching the Kelly Green Hour.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
You want Philly food?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sanders patiently running. Sanders good cut and another block. Sanders still going inside the 40.